Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about DuckTales the movie, Treasure of the Lost Lamp from 1990. I was a big DuckTales fan as a kid, and it was one of my favorite TV shows. And a DuckTales movie was something I absolutely had to see, and I actually did see it, I believe, either the weekend it came out or around the time it came out. I remember it was close to my birthday, and this came out around that time. And I really loved the whole experience of it. It felt crazy. The animation felt like a step up even from the TV show, which was really well animated. It was an amazing adventure of an experience. The thing with watching this movie now, and I think especially with this movie, is it's been so unavailable for so long. I kind of built this movie up in my mind to a certain degree. Even the video copy I had, which may or may not have been taped from a double VCR situation from a Blockbuster video store, and a babysitter recorded over part of it for an episode of Full House. Still mad about that. I don't even remember that babysitter's name, but still mad about that. Over DuckTales the movie, and you put Heresy like Full House? Anyway, it wasn't available on DVD unless you as Walmart exclusives, and if you did the Disney reward buck thing and stuff. Just very limited releases until literally 2 years before I shot this review. And so it wasn't very available. You could barely rent it anywhere on VHS practically. I don't really understand why it was so unavailable. People have guessed a variety of reasons. I don't really know if any of them are true because no one seems to actually know. It might just be Disney being weird and just concentrating on, bigger properties or something like that. But regardless, because of that, I built this movie up in my mind as this epic journey of a film, and because as I'm shooting this, the new DuckTales is just rebooted and they're playing it for 24 hours and all that stuff, and that's great. I rewatched some classic episodes and I like those, and I was like, I should watch the movie because I bought this because I saw it at Best Buy for pretty cheap actually. I finally watched it, and I have to say this feels kind of to me almost like the Cowboy Bebop movie or any movie of a TV show, where it almost feels like a very big epic part of the show, but not necessarily the best of what that show has to offer. This is not the Mask of the Phantasm of DuckTales, but I don't know if Mask of the Phantasm was the best, because Batman animated series was really, really good. But regardless, it's not a movie that's going to stand necessarily on its own, and this film was actually designed to do that. That's why you have a villain that's not anywhere in the TV show. That's why you don't have as many of the crazy co-stars or anything like that, because they wanted this film to sort of cross over. And that didn't happen, unfortunately. It opened pretty badly at 8th at the box office at the time. DuckTales is so much of a weird property because as popular as it was, as well known as the theme song was, it's not cool, but it's also so good and fun, you just don't care about that. And I don't necessarily think anyone in the 80s was going to see an animated movie based on a TV show that their kids were watching. And this film doesn't necessarily do much to get beyond that, but it's so well animated and so much fun. Seeing this on the big screen and seeing this again was such an awesome time that as a fan of the original series and watching it now, it's still a lot of fun, but I don't know if it goes past just seeing these characters in kind of more of a theatrical movie setting. Scrooge McDuck travels to the Middle East to uncover the treasure of the great thief Kali Baba with Huey, Dewey, and Louie and Webby and Launchpad McQuack, and is disappointed because there's no treasure, but there's a map, and they use the map to go to another pyramid that they find that's buried, and they have to do that, and then they find a genie with a lamp, and the genie becomes friends with the kids, but an evil sorcerer called Murloc. Is it Morlock? Yeah, Murloc. Yeah, Murloc. So it's not Merlin. Okay, I get it. So Warlock and Merlin, it's okay, I just got that. Did everyone probably got that before me. But so Murloc apparently is this evil wizard who has lived 1,000 years and used the genie a long time ago to live forever and have infinite wizard powers or something. And he's going to use the genie to do evil, but the genie at first is making friends with Webby and Huey, Dewey, and Louie and having a great time, as Scrooge McDuck is disappointed he did not get the treasure, and then all sorts sorts of craziness ensues where the villains try to get the genie and use the genie to do lots of evil, as even Murloc's assistant Dijon takes the lamp and takes away Scrooge McDuck's fortune. And how are they going to get out of this one without Scrooge McDuck's money and trying to make Genie possibly a real boy, because that's what he's always wanted, to no longer be a genie and be forced to do evil things. This movie has a lot going on, and even the title is like ridiculous. It's like DuckTales the movie, Treasure of the Lost Lamp. Couldn't you just be DuckTales Treasure of the Lost Lamp or DuckTales the movie? You put too much in there. Like, there's like a lot of titles in the title, and that's kind of exactly what the problem with the movie is. It kind of has too much going on. You have a genie, you have this Murloc guy, you have Dijon becoming a villain, you have like a lot going on. You know, you have a Scrooge finding this treasure. And the difference between, I think, this and an episode of DuckTales is that the episode has to quickly establish, like, oh, this is the conflict of the episode. This is the problem they have to solve. This is the situation, in fact. And you have to do it rather quickly because you only have 20 minutes. And with the longer runtime of this, they have kind of a harder time finding an exact sort of conflict. I don't really feel really stakes to it until Dijon takes away Scrooge McDuck's money and he's put in jail. And then I actually felt stakes and a conflict. Everything before is like, oh, they have the genie's granting wishes for all these kids. They don't really dwell on the morals of that. They just kind of have fun with it, which is actually enjoyable and fun, but I felt myself getting sick of that. And this was still, I think, in terms of the just regular kind of adventure, kind of fun movie, it still lived up to that, certainly. But in terms of plot structure and stuff, this movie just does not really work as well. DuckTales is a really great TV show and a really fun adventure show that most people can respect, both the animation and how much fun the adventures are. And I think this has that, but it is just way too complicated. If they just made it about, like, hey, they find a genie and they have all these problems with this genie and there's this thing with this genie and all that stuff, that would be a fine movie. But the Murloc stuff kind of complicates things. I think he's maybe an interesting villain, but he's also like weird, because why not have the Beagle Boys? Why not have the regular kind of villains? Instead, you have this villain just for the movie, which is like, all right, I guess. And we don't really honestly get to spend enough time with him because you're trying to do these things with the genie. You have this subplot with Dijon. You have this, you have that. It's just too many things going on. I think not having that conflict doesn't grab you in as well as it really should. This film kind of is a little strange because a lot of their reasons they didn't have these people from the TV show is they wanted people who haven't seen the TV show to get into it, but I honestly probably would never recommend this movie to anyone who hadn't seen the TV show. So if they're trying to make this crossover movie that could stand on its own, I would say, well, you failed. This movie doesn't hold up to that whatsoever. Now, this was actually made as a new studio under Disney, kind of a subsidiary called Disney Movie Tunes, and made primarily in Walt Disney Animation France. Disney Movie Tunes would eventually become Disney Toons, which keeps going on today, helped made the Planes movies and a lot of the direct-to-video stuff from the 90s that everyone hated, and a Goofy movie. If this movie had been successful, there were plans to make more DuckTales movies, there were plans to make a Chip and Dale Rescue Ranger movie. I keep hearing there's plans to make a Goof Troop movie, which eventually morphed into a Goofy movie, and because this didn't do well, that hurt that from happening. I kind of think like maybe they looked at that, but like Goof Troop wasn't around when this premiered, so I think it was more of just like it hurt the various like Darkwing Duck and Tailspin and thing from having theatrical movies, because I think that was probably the plan because of the DuckTales movie, and it didn't really work out. This didn't do well. It opened, like I said, at number 8 at the time and didn't make enough money. A lot of the people working on this was made more by Disney's television division, and even there's a quote on Wikipedia saying everyone worked on it. It was like their Snow White. It was like their big theatrical movie, and the animation in this in some sequences is really thrilling and amazing, and I actually remembered it still all these years later. I remembered exact sequences and exact beautiful pieces of animation throughout, and I thought they did a very good job of animating this. The animation holds up to DuckTales, which DuckTales was always an interesting show because Disney was kind of their first big push to make a TV show that wasn't on Disney Channel or something like that, like a major TV show. And instead of kind of half-assing it or making things like how you're supposed to make TV animation, which is you have to sort of cut some corners and you can't do what you do in the theaters basically because you have to get an episode out at a certain time and it's a shorter production process, and there's various reasons TV animation isn't as good as theatrical animation. It's more of a money and a time thing, and Disney went fuck that, and we're just going to make this amazingly beautifully animated TV show. So that's kind of one of the hallmarks of DuckTales, is it was really well animated, and I think it holds up to that. This was the beginning of that studio Disney Movie Tunes, which it seems like they wouldn't make another movie until Return of Jafar. I think it was just the banner or the subsidiary name. I don't think like anyone was like sitting around twiddling their thumbs for 4 years going like, when are we gonna make another Disney Movie Tunes movie? I just think they just had that name and they're like, hey, we can bring it back. I assume had this been successful, that studio would have just meant, you know, the theatrical versions of their TV shows, and then it became the crappier direct-to-movie versions of their other things, except for like a Goofy movie, which everyone, you know, likes, and other, they had some theatrical stuff, but it usually wasn't the main Disney releases. Now this was released between Little Mermaid and Rescuers Down Under. This was kind of like a big adventure year for Disney Animation. There seems to be a lot of kind of allusions to Indiana Jones from how they do the titles and the titles at the beginning to the poster and everything like that, more so than the TV show, which kind of makes sense because this is kind of like a pulpy adventure type of thing, so it kind of works pretty well within that. I think this movie is a good time. I'm glad I got to see it again. I hadn't seen it, and probably not seen it from one end to the other since the 90s, since my age was in the single digits or something. You know, it was fun to see it. I recommend it for people who grew up with it and things like that, and if you're really into it. And this was like a special kind of neat little thing, and I think there's certainly worse movie versions of TV shows, and that really wouldn't become a hallmark. This is kind of like between when you had Transformers and G.I. Joe the movie, and when you have Rugrats and all that stuff. They seem to like want to do that as a business model between this and like Batman Mask of the Phantasm, but it didn't seem like they found a way to really do it until like Rugrats hit, and you know, that whole Pan Pizza video about stuff like that. And I think unlike Batman Mask of the Phantasm, which really actually felt like a longer episode and had all the epicness and the great writing and what made that show so great, and even gave it kind of its own unique movie as well, DuckTales the movie Treasure of the Lost Lamp kind of shows the whole thing with like, hey, we're a movie, it has these amazing sequences, and that's what's so great about it, but plot and story wise it doesn't really show that, because as much of a great adventure show that DuckTales is, it was also like a great adventure show that had great stories within it. And the Scrooge McDuck comics that this is based on, which some Scrooge McDuck fans, according to the Wikipedia in a few places, say that this does not accurately reflect the Scrooge McDuck comics. I've never read them. I know they're much bigger in Scandinavia, and I'm sure this movie probably maybe was bigger there. It's fun. It just, as a story, it just kind of meanders for a little too long. It needed to find a conflict. It's interesting to compare this to Aladdin, which would come out a couple years later, where you automatically understand the conflict of Aladdin and why it's a big deal. He has this lamp, and the conflict of the genie and everything like that. And this used the genie, and by Rip Taylor, which is super weird that was one of their celebrity voices. Rip Taylor's kind of alright in this, but it's like, why was Rip Taylor? I mean, Christopher Lloyd, I get, as Murloc. He was like big in the late 80s, Back to the Future and all that stuff. And I totally get like why you'd want Christopher Lloyd in it. And he does a regular kind of Christopher Lloyd type performance. But Rip Taylor, it's so weird that he's the genie. Of all the people, they're like, let's get Rip Taylor. And I'm like, I mean, I'm sure he'd do it. Was Rip Taylor big in the late 80s or something? I mean, in Wayne's World 2, it's kind of like a joke. But like, why was he a genie who wanted to be a boy? Which is a little creepy that it's Rip Taylor. But anyway, I think DuckTales, the movie Treasure of the Lost Lamp, has too long of a title and has too much going on, but it's still a fun movie. It's a very fun kind of a kid's film. It just doesn't show like kind of the wonder of the adventures of DuckTales, which could always like give you something more and give you a fun, great adventure story. And I don't think this is as much of a fun, great adventure story as this is great to see like kind of more of a theatrical DuckTales setting and kind of admire it that. That's kind of all you're admiring. It's not like a great piece of filmmaking. It's an interesting piece of animation, and it's pretty cool to watch that animation, particularly some sequences where I still remember Scrooge McDuck running up the rope bridge on fire and fighting off those scorpions, everything. They did a great job on this in terms of animation. And it's still a fun movie. I don't think it's a bad movie. It just plot-wise is kind of like a total mess and doesn't really get into the well-told adventure stories that DuckTales really represented. So if you have seen DuckTales the movie, Treasure of the Lost Lamp, and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.